So are we live or like is this a good time for me to eat a bunch of hula hoops?
It's not a good time. Oh, fucking hell. Hello, so welcome to World 5. So, fucking, my mouth full of hula hoops. Why isn't someone else doing the intro?
I don't know, because it's funny. It's funny
No.
to just let this happen.
Okay, well,
So
welcome
true.
to the show.
Yeah.
So, hey, more and more space than you did this week.
This is the best intro we've ever done. This is
Yeah,
great.
I think we should do this every time.
Let's do this every week. Welcome, everyone. What Sophie was trying to say was this is Red Planet. Welcome in. We've got a great show for you this week, as per usual, but we're going to start with what we normally start with, even though we started with what we don't normally start with, which is a cold open. We actually started with a kind of hot open, real hot, coming in real hot, Sophie.
Real
Yes.
hot. Ooh, real
Yeah,
hot.
mouthful of hula hoops. So yeah, we're gonna start with what we normally do, which is Tim, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Ooh, I guess just in the wake of the flooding and stuff, there's been a lot of kind of, I guess, like small scale mutual aid, disaster capitalism kind of situations going on. So, there's not someone I know, but like a friend of a friend that was like organizing kind of like a mutual aid network that helped out and donated with some of that. So that's probably it for this week. Something that I've been pretty busy with work and trying to recover from the flood, basically. So that's it. What about you, Mule? What have you done this week?
Oh my gosh. So this week was really interesting. In the UK, we had on Wednesday one of the biggest protests that I've ever seen, and this happened all up and down the country, but it was also coinciding with a day of action with multiple unions, education unions, the RMT, lots of strike solidarity in the UK on Wednesday. Extremely cool. And I went with some other members from Greater Manchester Tenants Union to the Support the Right to Protest, Defend the Right to Protest rally in St. Peter's Square in Manchester. It was absolutely incredible. I genuinely can't begin to tell you how good it felt to be there. It was like I was actually expecting it to be like a very low key turnout, but there were so many people there. I'm not good at judging numbers, but there had to be 5,000 people there. Like there had to be. It was just an absurd amount of people. It took us ages to march all the way around the city, and we had like a samba band with us at the start, like right in the front, doing loads and loads of cool, marching beats and shit like that. It was really, really good. Just really good hopium. And when you get involved with something like that, you just can't, prevent the hopium. It feels great, and it made me feel like we're gonna win, because we are, and I believe that we will win. With that, Sophie, what about you?
I also believe that we will win, but that wasn't the base thing I did this week. I'll give an update on the warehouse situation first, because I know I've been mentioning that in my most based segments recently. I didn't do anything this week, but they did have like the final date that their landlord said that they had to be out, and so they kind of got all together, and like just the landlord didn't fucking show up, of course. So I'm pretty sure they've just won, basically. There's your update. What have I done this week? I started writing about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. My end of this call is a permanent disaster this week.
You're doing fine. You're doing amazing.
It's Sophie Day.
It's Sophie Day. Let's go.
Okay.
Claps in the chat.
I started writing about Theranos, which is a company that, if people don't know, basically they promised that they would have an invention that could test a ton of medical tests from like a single drop of blood, and then they just it was a lie. And the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, has been like sentenced for like 11 years in prison recently, but like she was found innocent for defrauding patients, which like
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
she like gave people like false results on like HIV tests and stuff like she did that, you know.
Jesus.
So, yeah. Like
But
she
she
was
was found
literally just
guilty
straight up lying.
but she was found guilty and is getting like 11 years in jail for like taking a bunch of rich people's money, which like based. So
Yeah.
like it's
Interesting.
I think it's kind of an interesting situation, and I'm going to be writing about it for a little bit. I actually got a book about it. A friend gave me Bad Blood by John Carreyrou, who's like the journalist who broke the story in the first place.
Yeah.
Cool.
Interesting, right? So she was the lying to people and like, like basically, like being responsible for like actual harm to people. That's not like that was like, no biggie, whatever.
Yeah.
Like
the bit we would
gonna...
actually consider harmful to like
yeah,
anyone.
exactly.
Yeah.
The investors, however, that's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
right. Wild.
Cool. Well, that's us for being based. What about the news? Yeah, since it's Sophie Day, let me tell you about the French Energy Union, which has given free energy to low-income households. We talked about last week the CGT, who are one of the biggest and oldest unions in France. They're far left. There are like other big unions, but they're much more like neoliberal centrist unions. And at some point we should maybe do a discussion episode kind of differentiating out between like unions that actually exist to push towards communism and unions that don't. Because I think it's an interesting topic. But basically CGT is an authentic, it's the real deal, real commie energy union.
Ones, and we spoke about them last week. They formed way back in the day, like 100 years ago.
Oh yeah, that's super old.
Because it was like Marxists, like like anarchists, communists, everything. Like they all saw the need to work together and banded together and formed this giant union that I can't remember what the membership was, but in its peak, it was like millions and millions.
It was huge. It was really, really huge. Yeah.
So like, it's like
last week we were talking about them because they'd shut off the power to one of Macron's ministers' offices.
Yeah, like one specific guy.
Yeah, like the guy who's responsible for the raising the retirement age. So they were just like, you just aren't going to get any work done, which is incredibly based. But to follow up on that, because people have been describing what they're doing as like Robin Hood behavior, they have now not only taken power from the rich, but they've given it to the poor. And this week, CGT gave free energy to a bunch of low-income households, and like coinciding with the strikes. So I think that this is an incredible move for a bunch of reasons. But one that's really prominent is just like people will associate on an emotional level that really fucking cool thing that the unions did with the strikes happening, right? And they'll just be like, it's good when strikes happen. So the leader of CGT said, I would suggest that some billionaires who think that we don't need to increase salaries and that everything is going well in this country could do with living the experience of millions of households who are facing energy insecurity, which it's just always good when you get like quotes from the leaders of these big left, like properly left unions, because they're always just like, yep, that is facts. Yep, good job.
Yeah.
Like
just anyone that is like has like because like media training and everything is important. There's actually a podcast that friend of the show, well, all friends of the show, on the 1 of 200 podcast that I used to do the streams with, and our other friend Emmy from People Against Prisons Aotearoa did a piece recently about the importance for orgs to like to engage with the media, because if we don't get statements like this one from the leader of CGT, we would just get something from the newspapers where they would be like like they would just make something up, or they would ask someone else.
Well, there's plenty of people to ask, because the final note I got for the section is the French government is big mad, but who cares? Like if the newspapers left to their own devices, there are a lot of like really pissed off neoliberals right now in the French government who are just talking about how like disrespectful this is and it's going to make everything worse and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not. They are talking about bringing some kind of legal action against the union for like trying to influence policy decision, which considering that the union is doing this alongside like hundreds of thousands of people protesting, I think it's gonna be pretty hard to like build that case, because it's like, it's not like, if you live in a democracy, then your policy decisions should reflect what people want. And if hundreds of thousands of people are like marching the streets on the reg, we'll see anyway. So that's kind of the end of that story. Mule, you want to tell us about? Well, you were just telling us about it a minute ago, but we've got some news details to add.
There's some details. That's right. We are talking about next the massive strikes that I was talking about on Wednesday in the UK. Basically, yeah, it is the long and short of it. That nurses, teachers, RMT, rail, maritime and transport workers and others joined in on the enormous strike. 500,000 UK workers went on strike in total. Nursing staff, this is a quote from one of the unions. Nursing staff have had enough of being taken for granted, enough of low pay, unsafe staffing levels, enough of not being able to give our patients the care that they deserve. That was from the Royal College of Nursing, which is one of the, I think, the more radical nursing unions. I've spoken to one of my friends who's a nurse, and she was, going to strike with Unison, I think, either Unison or someone else, and they tried to get her a shit deal. So, and most of the nurses were like, no, we're not doing that. We're gonna go with the Royal College of Nursing.
Which, again, to make that distinction that I'm saying we should spend some time on at some point, like, Unison is one of these really, really big corporate unions, and it's like, it's not that they aren't going to push for any progression of workers' rights, but like, compared to a radical union, it's going to be shit.
Yeah, it's very, very basic stuff. And in fact, some of them are so shit. I actually spoke about this on my own stream this week. Abellio in London, who are a bus firm, their workers, about 2,000 of their workers. So not even a shy amount.
Bus
really.
and trains.
Is it buses and trains? So Abellio, they're a transport company. But basically 2,000 of their workers actually went on strike despite the union trying to offer them a lower deal, a below inflation rate deal. So they basically said, fuck this, we're going to strike ourselves. And the company are so scared of this, they actually said, we're going to have to start cutting a lot of costs now to make sure that the business doesn't go under. So, it's an extremely effective thing. And, we spoke about unions a lot here on Red Planet. They're kind of our thing. But like what kind of happens is, generally speaking, the progression really from this is that, like, so, you're striking with a bit of a Libby union, and then you're going to, do your own thing. And then the step on from that is kind of like, well, we could just run the company ourselves and everyone gets a stake in the business, and that's a workers' co-op. So, and then obviously the stage after that is make other people do it. But, anyway. So anyway, who knows how it's going to go? But kind of seeing people react like this, I think, is very hopium. So anyway, on with this story. Basically, there have been more strikes planned for the 6th, the 7th, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd, the 24th, the 27th, and the 29th of February across a range of professions. We are talking strike fucking wave all over the fucking shop, folks. Like, this is awesome. So this is,
I listed them out like that in the notes because I was just like, this is practically every day in February.
Yeah, every day, pretty much in February. This is including ambulance drivers, university workers, civil servants, postal workers. There are so many people going on strike in the UK at the minute. And I saw a really funny post about this. I saw someone say, I kind of miss the old school BBC just completely, denying the fact that police were sent to the miners' strikes to like beat the shit out of them and stuff like that. I kind of miss the old days, because now they're just kind of making headlines like, what is union? Is it bad? Like, they just like have no idea how to deal with it because they never thought it would be a problem for them again. So anyway, I thought that was a pretty funny post to go along with this. Like, the establishment is shitting themselves. Like, this is what you have to remember, folks, is that you will see little, slits in the curtain, and you will be able to see light seeping out from beyond there. That is the good, beautiful light of hope. They're all shitting themselves. They're pissing. They're crying. They're coming. They're farting. You know, that's what's going down. So yeah, just remember that. Finishing this news story
That's
off.
true. We're reporting the news, and that's a true fact. In the they are farting.
That's right. That's right. Finishing off this story with a quote here from Network Rail's chief negotiator, Tim Shoveler. He said, "No one can deny the precarious financial hole in which the railway finds itself. Striking makes that hole bigger and the task of finding a resolution ever more difficult." But the writer here, who is Sophie, has said, "But like, that's the point, dumbass." You know, and that
something about a guy called Shoveler talking about digging a big hole while also like lying about how unions work. I'm like, fucking, there's some synergy going on here. Yeah, but like that's the point, dumbass.
What you got to remember, audience, is that this guy is going to be, you know, just absolutely not even remotely negotiating with these striking workers. It's just not going to be happening. And yeah, it's time. It's happening.
Like the union's negotiator is going to be someone whose job it is to like unflinchingly represent the demands of the workers, and the corporations or the government's like negotiator is going to be someone whose job it is to just like fob you off, just ever so gently for as long as possible.
I mean, that
and it's just
great.
Like he's just like he's just like, it's the railway is poor. It's financially, the poor railway comfort. Oh no, and the union's gonna make even more bad sad money.
It's actually like, you know, he's admitting to the fact that the railway is fucked. Like, you know, we've got all these problems with it. You know, it wouldn't be anything to do with how we're running the business there. You know, anything to do with how the private companies are looking after. You know, the railway.
Don't look at the bonuses. Do not look at the bonuses.
Well, it's also just great to hear like directly from the horse's mouth, like the union strategy is working. It's just like a bullied kid who's trying to turn the bullies away by being like, guys, if you keep on grabbing my waistband, my pants are gonna fall down. Stop. The financial situation is getting worse because of the strikes. Okay, let's strike some more then.
Oh, brilliant. So next up, we've got a story with our Tim.
Yeah, so we've got another one. This is like following a kind of wave of similar things happening. So Finland passes self-determination reforms for trans legal changes. So we've been talking a little bit over the last little while now about like trans self-ID laws. And so recently, both Scotland and Spain, and this is which is great because there's like the UK, and then there's like, you know, there's like England, and then there's like Scotland, and then there's Spain down here, and they're like, you know, coming at them from all sides.
Northern Ireland too. It's truly surrounded.
Yeah, totally. You know, like everyone's been passing these self-ID laws that essentially let trans people change their own, you know, like on official documents and stuff, change their own gender without having to, you know, get like 5 different doctors' seals of approvals and like, you know, any kind of like medical inspections or any ridiculous shit like that. It's basically just means you just go and you just say like, you know, like, hey, I'm a girl now, and they go, okay, cool, fill out this form, and then bam. So Scotland and Spain have done that. Finland have just passed it this week. So it takes out all the medical barriers for people to change their legal gender identification. So in Scotland, you could do it at 16 and 17, but over in Finland, they're going to make it so you have to be at least 18. So not quite as, you know, kind of not quite as lenient as Scotland, but you know, here we go. But it's actually a huge change in Finland though, because so Finland, this is the same for a bunch of Nordic countries as well. I mean, Nordic Scandinavian countries, that to change your gender and to be, you know, legally recognized as trans, you have to be medically sterilized. Like this is something I think Sweden do it as well, and there's a couple other places, which is like fucking wild, you know. It's like yeah, it's I think actually maybe it's the same in like in Dubai as well, where it's like, oh yeah, you can do it. We'll totally recognize you, but yeah, we just have to do this like fucked up eugenics shit to you first, you know? Yeah, which is like totally super fucked up. So this is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum from that, really. It's kind of like crossed all the way over. It's a huge upgrade. So yeah, which is pretty good. So we've got a quote from, I like the name is, it's a Finnish name, and you people know what Finnish sounds like. So Matti Pielajama something has
So
said,
I try and put pronunciations in the notes when I can.
yeah.
When I can.
Yeah.
Pilajama. I think that's how you
and so
say it. Pilajama.
Pilajama? Yeah. So
Yeah.
Amnesty International's Finland LGBTI rights advisor says, so by passing this act, Finland has taken a major step towards protecting trans people's rights and improving their lives and right to self-determination. So yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is like pretty cool. So it's like a huge step up from Finland. Hopefully a little, some of those other Scandinavian countries can take a little bit of inspiration from that, because yeah, I have seen people talking on Twitter about how doing things like, yeah, like getting sterilized is like huge for them, and they're like, they're still quite young and thinking like, I don't know if I ever want to have kids in the future or anything like that, or people saying that they definitely do, but like they don't want to, they also want to transition as early as possible, sort of thing.
Being able to have kids for trans people is it's like a two-sided issue, because there's like countries that require you to be sterilized before you can have these kinds of legal changes, and then there's also like the situation I have, for example, is like if I want to store like, what are they called, zygotes or whatever,
Gametes.
Gametes, I always forget that word. That costs a ton of money, and it's like, it's very much part of the process that like the NHS should be paying for, but I would not have it covered. So like, I just basically, yeah, it's just nigh on impossible to like have kids if you're trans and poor.
Yeah, it's super fucked up. But yeah, but this is a positive thing. I mean, it's still what we would call a non-reformist reform, but yeah, no, but it's good because
we could debate that one, because it is like, we did talk about like when you free up workers to be able to engage in the struggle, and I think that like having to at least for the gender recognition certificate in the UK, the amount of evidence you have to collect in order to prove that you are who you are, like they want like a bill from like every 3 months from the start of the period that you're talking about, and they want you to have been living as your gender for like 2 years at least. But if you've waited longer since you started, then you need to have like proof of address with your correct name on it for like at least once every 3 months for like, say 5 years or something. Like it can be a huge fucking deal. I don't know, I would say that like the amount it frees people up to just like live their lives is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, totally. Wait, so maybe I said the wrong thing then when I said
I'm so sorry. I went off on that. Like you said the opposite thing. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I don't actually remember what I said, but I meant the.
I think you said it was a non-reformist reform, and I was like, I malfunctioned. It's Sophie Day again.
But yeah,
It's Sophie
no,
Day.
But yeah, no, we're totally in agreement on. It's good. That's what we need to talk about. So yeah, so the additional bullshit admin and all that kind of stuff, and like it frees people up to do better stuff. So yeah, cool. Well, why don't you tell us, Sophie, a little bit more about what's happening in the UK with some 19-year-old that has recently been arrested.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So police in the UK have arrested, well, the arrest was actually a little while ago, but this week they sentenced a 19-year-old who is like far-right radicalized teenager who was trying to 3D print a semi-automatic rifle, and was also like encouraging people online to carry out like armed racist attacks. I think the topic of like 3D printed weaponry is kind of interesting, and I think that it's worth a much longer discussion. It's probably going to be its own episode. But for now, yeah, the UK counterterrorism police are endeavoring to remove a large amount of resources related to the production of 3D printed weapons online because they sentenced a far-right teenager to 11 years in prison for manufacturing an FGC-9 assault rifle and encouraging armed racist attacks online. The Guardian article talking about it said it took the Guardian just 3 clicks from Google to find a 194-page instruction booklet to build a semi-automatic FGC-9 firearm. Yeah, it is for the if people aren't aware, like it is as simple as like 3 clicks away to just find all the details and resources. If you have a 3D printer or whatever, that same article talks about. I've mentioned this on the show before, that like the barrel and like the firing pin and the other parts that can't be printed like can be bought from a retailer in Florida, and like the package is labeled as being like wind chimes, and like they talk about that in the article as well. I don't know if them talking about that in the article means that that's going to not be the case, but like, you know, solutions like that people have found to ordering the parts they need they're gonna carry on existing.
Now,
yeah.
Isn't
Especially
this...
like within the gun culture of America, where it's
Absolutely.
like they a lot of, you know, like with the lobbying groups or like people that just literally just sell guns and stuff.
Yeah.
They like they want these things, like they want things like, you know, barrels, firing pins and stuff to be accessible and stuff, and they know that like they skirt around the law to kind of like provide these things sometimes. So it's kind of like taking advantage of that already
this is like
little
there was
niche,
the whole
you know?
Discourse around bumper stocks in the US a little while ago, because like the, you know, gun culture is all about customizations.
It's literally wild. Like one thing that I read an article about it a long time ago, and it was by a woman who was like an outsider to the kind of gun community, and she went along to a gun show and just kind of documented it, and she said that she was just like, this is just like men collecting their little Barbies, and they just get all the little attachments, and they have to have the car, they have to have the dream home, they have to do this kind of stuff. And it's like these dudes that are like, you know, probably never going to actually have to use their guns in like any actual kind of like, you know, like situation that they would imagine might happen or whatever, but it's like they have to have access to all of these things in case they need a bump stock to defend their family, like whatever, you know.
Exactly.
This is pretty wild.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, 3D printed weaponry, because actually I'll back up and say, not that it's interesting, but I think it's going to be a necessary conversation that the people in the politics sphere need to have, because we've already had like the very high profile assassination of Shinzo Abe with a DIY weapon. It's going to be like, it's going to be a thing. We've got, and I mentioned this again in this story in a minute, but like the Myanmar rebels using the FGC-9, which is 3D printed. And like, as they say in this Guardian article, it took the Guardian just 3 clicks from Google to a 194-page instruction booklet to how to build the FGC-9. Like, it's simply so absurdly available for anyone who does want to do it that like we can't not talk about it. So I do think we'll have a discussion episode in a bit. Anyway, last October. Oh yeah, sorry, Mio?
Oh no, I was just gonna say the only thing that I can possibly say that I've seen anything remotely like this in real life is like Deliveroo drivers who started like modifying their bikes. Have you seen any of these? Like they're basically just turning their bikes into scooters now.
Well,
like, and I think it's really cool. Like they kind of have to do that because they can't afford to buy one. But I do think it's really interesting that this is something that people are using the internet. People are using 3D printing and all this kind of stuff just to like have like a super boring cyberpunk dystopia. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what's happening. It's obviously not the fault of the people doing it, but
no, I think there are other sides to it as well. This is something I would definitely talk about if we have this episode about 3D printed weaponry. But like there was an example I found of people in Palestine who are printing medical equipment, like, you know, like medical grade like tourniquets and stuff like that. I don't know about the full range of what they're printing, but they're printing a bunch of stuff that's really, really useful. And like
some
rocks.
There's a wider culture of printing stuff that is going to be useful in resistance against imperialist states, right? Which is not just like weapons, although weapons is going to be at the forefront of that conversation because like that's the forefront of the resistance against them, right?
Yeah, there's as a side note, there's also a really fascinating culture around 3D printing custom prosthetics for people that have lost limbs and things like that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
The difference in quality and comfort and everything between like a $50,000 medical prosthetic and you know, like one that you could print at home isn't that big. So it's you know, like you could get the $50,000 one that will probably last like, you know, quite a few years, or you can make a super cheap one at home and maybe replace it sort of like 2 or 3 times in that time.
Yeah.
And the difference is not that big or whatever. So and even just like there's some people that would just never really be able to afford the more expensive ones anyway. So so there's lots of interesting ways that that kind of stuff can be used to kind of like, I guess, like circumvent, you know, whether it's like the kind of, you know, the actual like the process of having to apply for insurance to, you know, do all this kind of shit or whatever, even in the imperial court, you know, like
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's something we should try to like. I think that obviously like the biggest gulf, like the biggest inequality or privilege that you can point to is like the difference in quality of life for people in the imperial core versus in the imperial periphery, broadly speaking. Like, you know, if I'm talking about just like systemic challenges I face as a trans woman, like they are themselves enormous, but I still also am white, and I still also am not like a kid working in a sneaker factory in Indonesia. Like my life is such a, but then like, just like you're saying, like with, you know, health insurance, for example, like the difference again between like just like ordinary people in the imperial court and the super rich is just crazy. Like the access to, well, this is something I was rewatching because I was talking about this article, this news story about the 3D printed stuff. I was rewatching Jake Hanrahan's interview with Jay Stark, the designer of the SGC9, and he was saying, like, he was making this point. I don't quite agree with how he phrased it, but I think I agree with what he was saying, which is he was like, the development of technology has no politics. And I don't agree with how he says that, because it's like, well, it does. It has enormous amounts of politics, but that's kind of what he's saying. He's kind of saying like, new technology should belong to everyone, and instead you always see it in the hands of the state every single time. And that's because the state has the most money. And so like he, as someone who's trying to like just make it so that, you know, guns are available to absolutely everyone, it's kind of the same as someone who's like, well, you know, the same but for a different end. That as someone who's like, yeah, I want to make sure that like prosthetic limbs are available to anyone who needs one.
It's like you can see like the angle there, like, you know, it's like you can either go to like the kind of like like the Kropotkin angle, where it's like all of this technology is only accessible to us because of the vast, you know, kind of like sum of human effort up until this point, and like, you know, all this kind of stuff. We've all been, so, you know, it should belong to everyone, and we should all kind of you know, we should all have it should be all accessible to everyone. And then there's like the libertarian angle, where it's just like, but also like we could just, you know, like I don't know. You can kind of see where there's the split in a lot of those communities, like a lot of the
but I think, I mean, so one thing,
communities are like the, you know, like the libertarian anarchists, where it's like they're really just like anarcho-capitalists or whatever.
I continue to find Jay Stark to be a very interesting character, because he's like Kurdish. So I'm like,
interesting.
It's like he says a lot of shit that's just like, I'm a free speech absolutist, and I believe in 2 things: the right to free speech and the right to bear arms, and everything else is bullshit or whatever. But I'm like, I don't know, that has a very different perspective on it. I didn't, you know, it wasn't until after he died. Sorry, we strayed so far from just reporting this story. I'm gonna report this story now. Last October, police in northwest London raided a home factory and arrested 2 guys who were producing FGC9s. The FGC9 is a firearm that was designed by a Kurdish founder of deterrencedispense.com and right to bear arms absolutist Jay Stark, R.I.P. Jay Stark, who was found dead in October 2021, 2 days after the German police raided his home. The police claim his death was due to a heart attack, which seems like a very funny coincidence.
It's wild how people always get raided by the police, like, or they always get like forcibly detained at this like that exact moment when they have a heart attack. It's weird.
Yeah,
how that
so
happens.
weird. It's
like,
just like the excitement was too much for. Sorry, I'm just quoting the police spokesperson. Actually, said the excitement was too much for him. My guy was like designing guns to be used in like insurgent groups against military hunters. I don't think that the excitement was too much for him from like seeing some dicks. Anyway, the FGC 9, which stands for fuck gun control, and 9 for the 9mm, is the most popular 3D printed weapon design due to its simplicity and efficiency, and has been seen in use by rebels against the military junta in Myanmar. And that's it on 3D printed weaponry for now. But yeah, we'll probably come back to this. Mule, do you want to tell me about Pakistan?
Sophie, I do. If you are unaware, folks listening, watching, it just doesn't work. Capitalism just doesn't work. There's no way. It just can't work. It's absolutely incapable of working. Here is an example. Pakistan. They have recently been in an economic situation called circular debt. Which describes itself as cascading government subsidies, where the government can't subsidize energy distributors, who can't pay energy producers, who in turn can't pay fuel providers. So it's this sort of like supply chain of no one being able to afford anything because capitalism doesn't work. And that's the long and short of it. But what is happening now is that Pakistan are applying for financial aid. And we've spoken about the IMF on this program many times. They are horrific, disgusting, piece of shit bastards. They are the enablers of capitalism all around the world. They put so much pressure on countries who are even remotely trying to, do good things for their people. And essentially, they're given requirements for Pakistan to hit in order to receive financial aid. Just the gatekeeping of financial aid in itself is so unethical for many, many, many reasons. So just sort of like going one step beyond that and making these requirements extremely hard to hit. So yeah, there's a little bit more information about this story here in the notes, and that is that Pakistan's economy has been struggling like this for multiple years. It's in the energy sector that is mainly focused. The government has been trying, sorry, I can't even get my words out. It's not just Sophie Day, it's Mule Day. The government has been trying to secure loans from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF must be destroyed, by the way, absolutely must. Since before the last election, but after the latest round of talks, the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has described the IMF requirements as beyond imagination. It looks like they're looking for more taxation of the poorest and removal of subsidies from governmental policy. So again, it's the IMF demanding that a country become less socialist, right?
It's like
country
demanding austerity so they can be like,
exactly.
Okay, well, these are the things that you need to do to get your country under control so that you can pay back the loans. It's not about like to get your country functioning and get it, to work on the kind of quality of living for the people. It's immediately like, how can we squeeze more money out of the working class?
Yeah, it's exactly that. There's no reason for this other than the violent upholding of Western imperialist hegemony. That's all it is. There's nothing else to it, folks. Sajid Amin of the Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan said 2 of the major IMF conditions, market determined exchange rate and petrol price increase, are majorly met already. The talks are now more focused on how to meet Pakistan's circular debt target in the power sector. The fund has not accepted the government's plan and has asked for a revised plan to deal with the circular debt problem. It's just, again, what else is there to say about this? It's demonic. It's absolutely demonic. Pakistan is a country that is suffering from the increasingly difficult demands that capitalism is placing upon itself, the demand for infinite profit, the demand for complete control by the rich, by the ruling class, and the oppression of the working class. It's just not working. It's just not working at all, and it's completely unfair that a country like Pakistan has to deal with this, just because people are just kind of being mean. Really, when you think about it, money is just things that are made up on a computer. In it nowadays, you can put just like a number in a computer, and it's there. That's actually what the IMF do when they make loans. They just go, all right, brr, there you go, there's the dough. You don't think they're fucking printing out trillions of dollars, do you? You don't actually think they're printing that paper. Like, it just doesn't fucking happen that way. So why couldn't they just not, give them the money? It sucks. It fucking sucks. But that's that ghoulish stuff from the IMF.
Demons are real. The IMF must be destroyed.
That's right. I think Tim's got a story for us from Down Under. And
I do. From where? From where?
Down Under.
Yeah, this one is from Australia, actually. So not my Down Under, but the other Down Under.
That's right, the other one.
Yeah,
the worst one. The worst one.
It's up for me, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
You're basically Britain, but down under, aren't you, New Zealand? Like, that's basically what it is.
Politically, Australia is Britain, but down under.
Yeah.
I meant geographically.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I mean, maybe I feel like New Zealand's probably more like Ireland, but down under. Like, I think and then Australia's kind of more of our England. I don't know. Yeah. So he died a little while back now, like I think a couple weeks ago, but they just recently had the big state funeral thing for Cardinal George Pell, who was the big cardinal Catholic Church guy in Australia, who had been implicated in a million little schemes and scandals, usually revolving around child abuse in some form. He actually went to jail himself for a little while, but they ended up overturning the conviction for like a bunch of bullshit reasons. But he died, just like earlier in January, I think like the 10th or something like that. And they just recently had his big funeral, and it was it's wild because the guy in the picture here, his tattoo says Wendy, but it really looks like it says Wendy's. It really looks like he's got like a hard metal Wendy's tattoo. Yeah, but so this is actually a photo of protesters against his funeral, for all the reasons that we've just talked about. There was so they say there was hundreds of protesters. I'm not exactly sure, like, on numbers or anything like that, but and it's like been super unreported on in Australia, where it's like, it's huge news. Everyone knows, like, it's been a big political issue for years, like with the, like the whole thing with like the state, and it's kind of like enabling of the Catholic Church and, high level people within it and stuff. But yeah, there's it's been pretty fucking wild. So a friend of mine is like a researcher that works in like all kinds of stuff for, like, I guess kind of like figuring out the way that the church has enabled a lot of like these historic cases of abuse and all this kind of stuff. And like they've mapped out this gigantic network of child abuse and its relation to, the Catholic Church in Australia. And it's wild how it's like a giant pyramid that just all comes back to Cardinal George Pell. So for years he got away by saying that he just wasn't aware of stuff happening, or they were never open to him or whatever. But then over years things have come out where it's been like, no, like this person, like this, they had a meeting, they talked about this, they discussed it, he knew exactly what was going on, he was a close confidant of the abuser, all this kind of stuff. And it was just instrumental in keeping it under wraps and being like basically the Jeffrey Epstein of the Australian Catholic Church, where he would, instead of like actually dealing with predators in the institution, he would just move them somewhere else, or like he knew exactly what was going on. And then so yeah, it's wild for all this to be fairly public knowledge, but then like you've got former prime ministers at his funeral, like Tony Abbott, the former prime minister, referred to him as a soldier for truth and the truth and saint for our times.
I would refer to Tony Abbott as a soldier for shit. Fucking
yeah, and while people were like clapping and cheering on and stuff, yeah, it's pretty wild. And yeah, I mean, and it was like the funeral was full of people from like judges, like really well-known politicians, everything, like media figures, all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, it's super sus. But yeah, also the Catholic Church is like super it's just like, I mean, I was going to say it's quite deified, but duh. No, but it's like its place in Australian society is like, is huge. More so, I would say that like Catholicism isn't huge in New Zealand. When I've been in the States, I've found that there's like Catholic communities in certain areas, like like in New York and stuff. Like, but in general, it's not like as huge. But in Australia, it's gigantic, and there's like a huge, like a lot of diaspora communities from like the Mediterranean and stuff, especially in areas like Sydney and Melbourne and stuff, are like really hardcore Catholics. So it's like, it's kind of like for a lot of people, they see like an assault on, like Cardinal Pell as an assault on Catholicism or themselves, part of their identity or whatever. So people that are ordinarily not very radicalized, like have been very defensive of the Cardinal, which is like, yeah, pretty fucking wild. Whereas like, I think a reasonable person would see this and be like, oh, okay, no, like, like I think if you're Catholic and you really, and you love this and it means a lot to you, you want to, you want to get rid of these elements, right? Like you would want to kind of get rid of the rot that is kind of tainting this this thing that would be really important to you. But
Australia is cementing its position as the Pacific England by having the tradition of lovable public nonsense.
yeah. So it's pretty wild. But yeah, and he was actually the most senior Catholic official ever to be convicted of child sex abuse. Which is like interesting, which is only like 2 years ago. 3 years
Jesus.
ago. Yeah. Anyway, so I think that's it for the news this week.
Okay.
We did it.
Well,
on that
we did it, chat.
Did we tell people that we're running a shorter show this week? We probably should have done that.
We should have.
But we're doing an hour shorter this week, so we will be only going for another hour after this. So recently on the show, we had a discussion of transformative justice with Chelsea and Kelsey from Cradle Community, and we liked what they had to say so much that we decided to read their book. Actually, Tim decided to read their book, and then he told us that it was really good, so I decided to read it as well. And
well, I started reading it at that point, and then I said everyone else read it, and then I feel like everyone else read it, and then I didn't even pick it up for like 2 weeks, and then like yesterday I just read the entirety of the rest of it, and
it's like, okay,
basically
Tim.
One sitting.
Don't worry, I haven't read it at all because I'm shit.
And so their book, Brick by Brick, How We Build a World Without Prisons, is what we're going to be discussing today. Tim and I are going to be telling Mule about it, and Mule will ask questions, I guess.
I'm going to be learning in the way that I like to learn, not in the way that people try and make me learn, which is read books.
The book is a fantastic entry point for anyone looking to understand abolitionist politics and to understand how a new approach to justice can change the way we look at everything. And today we want to talk about how it can apply to us and our comrades in our real lives. So let's talk about hang on a second. Brick by Brick, How We Build a World Without Prisons.
Yeah,
It's good.
I have the ebook, so I can't hold it up. But like,
cucked.
Imagine I'm holding it. Wait, I'll hold up my phone. I read it on.
Whoa! Look at that book.
It's also worthwhile reading the subtitle and title backwards. How We Build a World Without Prisons, Brick by Brick. I mean, I liked it a lot. I think that like 2/3 of it or whatever, because I am who I am, were not news to me. That's not fair. Maybe like half of it. I don't want to say 2/3. I'm looking at the page count right now, and like So basically, when you get to section 3, it's called Brick by Brick, the building.
Yeah.
There's lots of like figures and stuff that I did not know going through the first part of it, or the first 2 sections, I guess.
I think the
like,
first, the
broad shape of
section
it, I
is
did
kind of
know.
like, the earlier stuff for me I found was like kind of like things that I had known from all different places, but then they've kind of assembled it kind of like as like, you know, it reads almost kind of like manifesto like, right? And it's like
Yes.
they're like, this is the goal, and then they're kind of setting it up, and they're like,
Yeah.
this is why we need to do this or whatever. So they talk a lot about like you know, just like kind of like systemic injustices and all this kind of stuff, which I think like for a lot of people that are already kind of like have done a little bit of reading or have like, you know, listened to a little bit of stuff about, you know, prison abolition and stuff, probably going to be a little bit more familiar with some of that stuff.
Yeah, like I said, it's because I am who I am. Like, if you're not literally me, like I think there's a lot of stuff here. You know, people are always asking me for stuff that's a really good introduction to a bunch of topics. And honestly, this is probably going to be one that's going to end up being like, oh, you're asking me about the police? Yeah, brick by brick. You're asking me about like racial discrimination? Brick by brick. You're asking me about like psychiatric care,
housing,
like brick by brick every time. Like this is actually really comprehensive, and it also does a really good job of pulling all those things like into a cohesive picture as well. Yeah.
We've got JMM 1610 in the chat saying, wish Heja Press made audiobooks too for their book releases. Well, funny story, because I actually, for the last part of it, I plugged it into an audio e-reader thing where, you know, you put the ebook in and it reads it out to you. So I did that for the last part, and it was like in the system voice, so it's not like not the same as a really good narrator. But the funny thing is, though, I tweeted about it yesterday, is that for some reason, I don't know if it was the ebook or the app that I was using was kind of buggy. So it wasn't pronouncing any F's and I's together. So instead of saying first, it would say RST. But after ages, I didn't. The way I realized that the time that I realized that something was up was when, because it talks a lot about the UK Home Office, because Cradle Community are from the England or whatever like that. But it kept saying like, you know, like I should have recorded some quotes, but it kept blaming everything on the homos. And they like would literally say the homos, and it's because it was trying to say the Home Office, but if you take out the F and the I's, it's just like the homos, you know. And I was just like, and like it slipped through a couple times, and I was like, wait, what was that? What was that? And then I went back and like rewound and it was like, oh, the Home Office. But I should record it, but yeah, I'm not sure what it was, like if it was like the e-reader or like the way that they formatted the ebook or whatever, but
AI will just be bigoted, you know. That's what
I know, exactly. That's it. I didn't understand. Like now I understand the homosexual agenda. It's actually identical to the Home Office's agenda.
Wow, that's not what I've been doing.
Twist.
I've been talking to some homosexuals. I do not think that's the case.
It's all those Raytheon employees, I think.
I knew the tech trans were going to betray us eventually. Like I think a good example of what I mean when I'm saying like there are statistics and figures in here that I didn't know would be like they said that only 4% of people in the UK earn over £46,000 a year, right? Which I would not have figured, right? Like I've been on like a 20k salary that had a progression to get to like 30k or whatever if I stayed with this like awful tech company. You know, so I wouldn't have thought that like 46k was like such an unattainable figure for people, because it's certainly like my parents and like my family would think that it's like, you know, a very achievable normal thing being like middle class aspirants, but like it's 4% of people, and that's like that really speaks to the dire situation. But it's like, you know, did I not know that there was massive wealth inequality or income inequality in the UK? No, I knew that. I just didn't know it was like that's extra crazy. A lot of this stuff is like it's bringing a lot of stuff together so that like when you look at all this stuff side by side, you're like, oh, the situation is like it's not just dire, like it's been designed to be as shit as possible, and then it's actually failed on top of that. So like any kind of provision that the capitalist system is trying to the way the capitalist system gives us housing or gives us jobs or gives us food or whatever, none of it's working. And even if it were working, it's designed to make everyone have the worst life.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I find it the citing specific figures and stuff also is really good, because I find that in a lot of books like that do kind of have a more, like, I would say political books that have this more kind of like manifesto kind of form are often kind of light on the figures, you know, like they will just, you know, like running on vibes.
Well, because they want it to be more timeless, right? Like, they don't want to be like,
exactly.
In 2021, this was true, but then you're reading it in like 2030 and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think that really kind of like backs up a lot of what they're saying.
For sure,
no. But in the and what did you say was about the last third? It kind of switches to being the more like kind of.
I don't want to dive straight into that. I do want to say they had a couple of really good examples. So I just want to. I'm not trying to just go through like the contents page or whatever, but they had some really good structure to the book. For example, like the second part of section 2, brick by brick, the dismantling, which just sounds awesome. Like they've just got great titles throughout this. But like the second section of that is called Crimmigration, which is like they're talking about how like criminal law and immigration are like fused into this one horrible thing. And that's like super true, especially like we had Joe Moem from the Good Law Project on the Red Planet stream for Trans Power. And besides trans issues, like the biggest other focus of the Good Law Project is on immigration issues, because like for everything, and I keep saying this on the show, right? But like everything the state gives to citizens, they're gonna every time citizens get something new, the border between who is citizens and who isn't citizens gets more violent, because it's like it's guarding more stuff. So like that's part of like, you know, when we have in the British media like every day stories about how underfunded the NHS is that don't call for like the NHS to just get more funding from the government. They call for like privatization, or they blame immigrants, right? So they're like, we get free healthcare, they want the free healthcare, so we can't let them in or whatever. Yeah. And also just before that section is a section just titled Imperialism. So like I do think it comes from a really good perspective. It references Huey P. Newton. Specifically, actually, it references Newton in relation to Intercommunalism, which is like a book that he wrote with Lenin. So like I think it you know, in terms of theory, like I really couldn't fault its like standing. I'm not actually going to have much critical to say at all. Like I said this on Twitter earlier, but like this is one of the best books I've ever read. It's genuinely amazing.
Love that they led with imperialism as well, because and I think it is like it's core to a lot of what they're talking about. It is very grounded in the kind of the UK, you know, like talking deliberately about how, you know, like Britain only functions because of imperialism, sort of thing, and its history and all this kind of stuff. But I think it is, you know, a lot of it is like pretty applicable to most countries in the imperial core, like except in, you know, like where it's talking about the, you know, like England's kind of like history of exploiting kind of, or even just like the immigrants and refugees that come in, and like, you know, like whereas in the UK they're talking about like Caribbean migrants and stuff. In New Zealand it's the exact same thing, except it's, you know, it's like people from out in like various islands around the Pacific and stuff. But there's like a very similar kind of relation there. There's not exactly the same or whatever, but I think a lot of it is very kind of like very similar, a similar dynamic there. So yeah, I think it is really good to start with imperialism, because I think that a lot of like that's something that, I mean, when they came on the stream we talked about how important that was to kind of all of our politics as well. But I think it often gets kind of I wouldn't say brushed over. I would say I think it gets like the ball gets kicked downstream for a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say that this would fit in neatly with something that Mark Fisher said, which is one of his more contentious points, right? Because it's one of those things that like then Fisher fans who are kind of dickheads anyway, like take and kind of, rather than trying to use it to change anything, they just use it as a cudgel to like attack like people who they think are too invested in IDPOL or whatever. But like Fisher said that there's a problem in the modern left where power is the thing that people who oppress have. So to have power is wrong. So it is like morally good to be a victim. And so we'd rather focus on ways that we are being oppressed and victimized and just talk about that rather than try to actually build and use any power. And like, again, like you can easily understand the implications of this where like someone who's kind of a dickhead and kind of a reactionary would use this point very negatively. But like, obviously the point he was trying to make was like, we should change that situation and build worker power. And I think that like, often I think that discussions of imperialism slide off of people's brains a little bit because of that. They're like, well, that's like a global empire. Like, I can't do shit about that, but I can like feel bad about, you know, I can like tell people how sad it makes me that, you know, another black guy got killed by American police or whatever.
I kind of feel that like it's usually one of those discussions that like kind of people go like, oh, we'll come to that later, you know, like people will be like, okay, well, we'll talk about all the reasons why things suck in our neighborhood, and then later on, if you're still listening, we'll do that. Whereas I think it's I love that they came up front with it, because it's like, it's, you know, it's like
just like we got to deal with this. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
the
exactly.
issue.
You know,
yeah,
and it's not like I don't think it should be thought of as something that it's like, oh, that's like an advanced level discussion or whatever. Like I think
Not
it's like
all,
very possible for everyone to understand, and I think it is like one of those things where it's like we've seen like numerous times when I guess like more like I don't know, just like grifters on the left will completely ignore, or they will like just deny you know, deny the reality of imperialism, and like I guess like the way that the people in the imperial core still, like even the average working class person that has might have a shitty life.
Some people are like really incensed by like Lenin's concept of the labor aristocracy. For people who are familiar, right? Like there is a labor aristocracy. If you're born into a country where like by being born there, you get certain privileges, then like compared to all the other workers in the world, you have those privileges and they don't. And just like Tim was just saying, like you can be like an Appalachian farmer who's in dire poverty, but you'd still be in the labor aristocracy, which is like, it's understandable why that's like an unpleasant like idea to swallow, but it is still true. It's like the two kinds of grifters on the left when it comes to imperialism are like, imperialism is the only thing that matters. If you're talking about like psychiatric abolition, you don't see the real issue, and or on the other hand, like imperialism isn't real. I want Bernie so we can have a social democracy in America. And like
exactly.
Cradle Community like threads the needle so perfectly, because they're like leading the conversation with imperialism, but they also make everything really, really human. So like this is an example a couple of examples I wanted to read straight from the book. Could they start part 10 of section 2, an ableist society, by saying this: when Elliot discovered his sister would be leaving their shared home due to an ongoing custody battle, he responded just as any 14-year-old boy in distress might. He had a meltdown. His mom, Sumaya, a community care activist, had popped out to their local shop when she received a terrifying phone call. Elliot is black and autistic and lived in a rural white area where, instead of meeting his emotional distress with empathy and care, his neighbors had called the police. Despite Sumaya's pleas, 6 police officers entered their home and violently restrained Elliot. One officer smashed Sumaya's phone when she tried to call an ambulance for her son. Elliot spat at him and was subsequently charged with assaulting 3 police officers, right? So it's like, when you're talking about ableism, what like an incredible like human way to to show like how violent ableism is. And then like the very next chapter is the mental health industrial complex, and it mentions this story, which comes up again in like the next chapter. But like in 2016, Sarah Reed, a black woman, died awaiting psychiatric evaluation while on remand at Holloway Prison. An inquest concluded that unacceptable delays and failures in her psychiatric care had contributed to her death. While Sarah may have died in prison, we cannot ignore that she was first sent there for having defended herself against sexual assault in a psychiatric hospital, right? And it's like, they tell some stories about people just briefly in like often at the starts of chapters like that, and it's like, these are all stories that like, if this is happening in society has failed. Like we live in a failed society if this can happen to anyone.
I like that they do have quite a lot of those kind of like personal stories, and then they will, you know, and they'll talk about like there's, you know, they mention a lot about how many like incarcerated black and brown women are from people that you know, like are often the ones that called the police to come help them, you know, like a domestic dispute or something like that, and they end up getting arrested themselves and things like that. And like, and I think it's good because they do talk about, like, you know, they are talking a lot about imperialism and like the kind of exploitation of the imperial periphery, but they are still, or they're always bringing it back to a very local community focused kind of level, which is really good because, you know, like a lot of people try, it's like kind of like the divide that we were talking about before with the people that are like, imperialism is the only thing that matters, or people are like, my personal kind of like freedoms are only the only thing that matters, where it's like this thing where it's like, okay, well, these are actually linked, you know. And if we take a bigger look at the entire thing, then you know,
I'm hoping to be able to do a thing sometime in the foreseeable future where I like talk about how much you can move, like how much you are able to like travel or move around, because I think that like that might do the same thing of like linking those together, right? Like we live under a big power structure and you can't really see it unless you try to like move around the world, or move like your stuff around the world, or move money around the world, right? And like, sorry, this is a tangent. I just think that like people do not conceptualize, like you're saying, like their personal freedoms as having to do with the global situation.
Shafiq in chat is saying victims being punished for trying to access help is more common than not. I think there is a lot of they talk about that a lot in here, and I think that also ties into a lot of the psychiatric stuff as well, where it's like the institutions and the agencies around it are not necessarily like, if you are a person that is like experiencing like significant psychiatric distress, the institutions that the agencies that you're supposed to contact are generally not the ones that, you know, like very helpful, or, you know, are going to really put you at ease and help you, you know, like sort of thing. So it's like this, and like it's almost like, well, I mean, it's like a criminalization of you know, certain kinds of mental health sort of thing, where it's like you could be in a really distressing situation, you could be like very unwell, need help, and you call the people you're supposed to call and they basically just put you in jail, right? Like, and it's like, it's not called jail, but it's, you know, like it is a prison.
I remember when we called with I think we called with Chelsea, I think, to talk about having them on the show. Like they'd sent, you know, the Cradle Community just functions as a collective all the time. So like they have everything, they have discussions internally, and like they sent one person to kind of like hear from us about what the show's about, and like get the vibe, and then kind of go back to them, and then they'd have an internal discussion about like how they wanted to engage. And like I remember one of the things that I said about the show was like, it is our position that like colonialism has not ended. Like it's just hidden itself in various waves of pretending to do nicer stuff. And I do think that like, and she was delighted when I said that, like she was like, okay, hell yeah, I'm into this show. But like their section on imperialism, like I think does a really good job of just unflinchingly being like, it's not like Britain benefits from having been an empire. It's not like France like benefits from having had colonies or whatever. It's like there is the imperial core now, and there were these empires before, and you'll notice like they're the same countries still benefiting from exploiting the same other countries. Like that hasn't changed. Like to draw any kind of line to when like, you know, empire ended is nonsense.
There's there is a lot in this book about drawing to like direct links to like, you know, colonialism and stuff like that, you know, and it's like and it is just kind of, especially in, you know, I guess like England, the seat of the empire or whatever, or what was or whatever, you know, anywhere like in the imperial core, I think is, you know, like the existing systems that people benefit from, you know, they're all built on that history, sort of thing. But there was some other stuff in there that I really liked as well, about just the focus on the criminalization of the poor, and I mean, it's like, you know, they talk about like the class divide of what is considered like criminal and all this kind of things like that. Like there was there was one part I highlighted. Where was it? Under reframing crime, violence, and safety. There was this bit. They say sex work, drug possession, and not paying your TV license are all crimes worthy of state punishment. Yet the deaths of 72 people in the Grenfell Tower fire, state-sanctioned killing during war, healthcare cuts, preventable deaths in care homes from COVID-19, and evictions of people from their homes are not deemed criminal. Which I think this is really good because it's just this tiny little paragraph, but it does link in all these different things, you know, from like the Grenfell Towers stuff, like state-sanctioned killing during war, healthcare cuts, all these things are you know, like to talk to the average kind of like liberal or conservative or whatever like that, they might say those are all completely unrelated things or whatever. But I think if we actually, you know, if we look at this through a proper kind of, I would say like a materialist lens, I mean, when we look at like, you know, like the reality of imperialism, then you see that all these things are like, they're all linked, you know? So yeah, and I think it's like, it's really succinct for them to just, you know, in one little paragraph be like, oh yeah, all of this stuff or whatever, where it's like, yeah, if you hadn't thought about that before, you might not realize how these things are linked. But I think they do a really good, they carry on and they kind of talk about like the nature of harm and violence.
I honestly can't recommend this book strongly enough. Like, I think it just does all this so perfectly. Like, people should be like, buy this as presents for people who you think might be into abolitionist politics. Like, I might leave this in the like take one leave one section in my cafe, because I just want the widest reach of like people to read this.
yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's really good. There's a lot of good stuff, but yeah, there was a section in there that there was in that same section there was something I think that mentioned about how it's like, I think it was like most imprisoned women in the UK are literally just because of like not paying their TV license or something like that.
Yeah, it's
just
fucking
like,
crazy.
Which is like a huge that's literally just like class warfare, right? Like, because it sounds so silly, like a TV license. Oh, you didn't pay your fucking little BBC.
You watch the news without paying for it.
Let's talk about the TV license for a minute. It's actually the renewal time around now. I think I just paid mine, and what you have to remember is that what Tim said is absolutely right. It is basically just the BBC license fee. That's what you're paying. You're paying for money to go towards a corporation that is extremely biased. It's ran by people in the ruling
They're just
class.
A state propaganda unit.
Yeah, they're a state propaganda unit. You know, they broadcast bigotry and you know, there have been so many scandals.
It's like wild, right? It's
covering
like,
up
you didn't pay your money to get your fucking your transphobia and your Doctor Who. Like, go to jail. Oh.
Yeah. And so here's the thing, wouldn't it make sense then, chat? That if you didn't pay your TV license, that would be fine as long as you didn't consume any BBC media. You would assume that would be great, wouldn't you? But actually, no. If you have any screens in your fucking life, and I think they even count like phone screens now, like if you're able to get on the internet, they're like, you have to pay a TV license.
I don't have to pay a license for my phone or my like, it's if you have a TV, right?
Oh, is that what it is? I don't fucking know. All I thought was that like, if they think if you can access BBC stuff, then you should pay for it.
I mean, they try their hardest to make it like, to prove the case that you technically could access shit.
Didn't they used to just like pretend? Didn't they used to just go knock on your door and be like, hey, you know, like you got a TV in here or whatever?
Yeah.
It was like
there's a really popular scam where someone will come around with like, they're holding like an fucking ammeter for like checking circuits or some shit, and they're like, I can see you've been watching TV here, and it's like, fuck off, man. Like I've had this happen at like 3 separate addresses I've lived at in London.
And as well, you're absolutely not obligated to open the door to the TV.
No,
like,
they have no powers.
No, literally, it's like a third-party company. It's so bizarre.
Boy, you got a license for that telly?
That's just literally what it is. It's not even a joke.
But yeah, I think they did a really good job of tying a lot of stuff together. Where I think that even someone like me who is unfortunately British, you know. I spend a lot of time talking about British politics. I think sometimes I can still lose track of like things fitting into the bigger picture. Like like Nat's family are Romani, and like in so they talk here about like property laws and trespass laws are also used to disproportionately police and imprison Gypsy, Romani, and Traveler (GRT) communities who make up only 0.1% of the general population, but 6% of those incarcerated in women's prisons. Right, like that is 60 times disproportionate. Right, that's so wild. And yeah, like I'm because Nat's family is Romani, and we've been to some like Romani activist group stuff together, and she talks about it a lot. Like I'm familiar with a lot of stuff to do with the GRT community and their issues. But then I think like even then, like sort of reading this just right alongside then talking about the prevent strategy, which if people aren't familiar, the government's anti-terrorism prevent strategy has injected high levels of surveillance policing into Muslim and South Asian lives. Basically, it's like it's a thing where people can dob people into the state and say, I reckon this person might be getting radicalized. And because the state's like main focus in terrorism is on Muslims, like they're primarily using this to surveil Muslim communities. And I also like, I think another thing is like when it's building a bigger picture, it's also easier to have a much more reasonable perspective of the way the world actually works. Because if you're kind of like, a lot of people have memed on the prevent thing, right? Like a lot of people in my kind of social space online have been like, "Oh, I'm posting extremist content," or we just finished and she rolled over and started posting extremist content, or like getting referred to prevent because of my t-shirt, or something, whatever memes. Like, and it's like, right, but like for how we're talking about this thing, and it is also like a genuinely really terrifying authoritarian thing where they're trying to get people to surveil each other. Like, hang on a second, like I am in this social circle of commies. Like, I don't know anyone who's been referred to prevent. I do, but then, right, the other day I met someone who works with young people, and she knew one of those young people had been referred to prevent. And I was like, oh, right, like for all of our like fucking meaning about it, we're like joking about it and then acting as if it basically doesn't exist because we aren't like kids. And actually,
right,
a lot of this is it's all of these systems are trying to like construct a perfect overlap in order to like police certain groups. And like one of those is young people, and one of those is like immigrant communities, and one of those is like Black and minority ethnic people, the GRT community, queer people, the ways in which I'm policed for being a queer person, right? The ways in which I am surveilled or like systemically held back by society and the state for being a trans woman. Like, I'm not, I'm not held back by the, like, I've not been fucking referred to prevent.
Yeah.
But I am making extremist content.
Yeah.
Like, by the government's definition, like this right now is extremist content. Like the government is absurdly conservative, and like it does not, we haven't been fucking referred to prevent, and that's because it's not there to do that to us. Like we aren't actually the target of it. I'm a self-employed small business owner, in terms of the legibility of the state. So I'm actually a crucial piece of the capitalist puzzle.
That's true. Me too.
So I'm not being referred to prevent. Whereas like some kid who they kind of need, like they talk about exclusions. They talk about like kids used to get caned in British schools now, and and now they, now instead they're using social exclusion and often like isolation, which like is also extremely harmful in a different way. And always those punishments then and these punishments now are used disproportionately against poorer, Black and brown kids, and and so on. I think it does a really good job of focusing on youth liberation as well. That's one point I want to say. Like, yeah,
I think that ties into, there's some other stuff in there that's really good about talking about how Britain's prison population is sustained through the criminalization of acts of survival. So
yes.
Like things like sex work and things like that, criminalized.
Or just getting your Doctor Who without paying the DV license.
Yeah, getting your Doctor Who, and just like different like shoplifting and things like that.
Yes.
And drug offenses and all this kind of stuff like that.
One of the guys who works at the local Tesco to me has started wearing a body camera on shift. An actual like fucking. Sorry, I cut you off. It just
no, but it's true though, like it's it's like, and it's like, what are you going to steal from Tesco's that you need a body cam? Like, you don't have anything in this Tesco's that is worth.
I
like,
bought this vape off a guy who was wearing a body camera. Like, like fucking what for? What is happening? Yeah.
But yeah, there was actually one part that I thought was really interesting as well, is that according to this is a quote from the book, according to the 2021 Bromley Briefings prison fact file by the Prison Reform Trust, more than 2/3 of people in prison were unemployed in the month before being taken into custody, and 15% were homeless. So that's like, more than 2/3 were unemployed, like, that's like fucking wild. And I think it like kind of ties into the whole idea of like prisons kind of being like like almost like a method of, like definitely like a method of like class control, like and then this goes back to the other stuff as well, like how they mention a lot about kind of like the crimes of people like like Boris Johnson and stuff through like criminal negligence of things like like the COVID response and stuff, like all the people that have died in because of that. But it's like they will,
or the Grenfell fire they mentioned, right? Like the cladding was inspected, they were like, it's super flammable, and then the fucking tower burned down, and like
they were like, oh, but it's cheaper than the other stuff. So
more UK members of parliament have become landlords since the Grenfell fire. And like specifically like including of places that have this fucking like flammable cladding.
Yeah. It's wild. So I think it's good that they because they're ultimately talking about prison abolition and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like they're talking about the way that they're talking about the definitions of harm and violence, and how we can kind of like how we can like deal with that happening in our community. And I mean, like most of the stuff we've been talking about is about like systemic harm and violence and stuff, but it does get in later in the book. It goes more into the kind of like direct kind of like person to person harm and things like that, like, more about like what to happen when someone in your community is like has abused someone, is violent, or anything like that, and how to deal with that, which I think is really interesting, especially like we've been talking about like how that applies to not just like communities like your friends group in real life or whatever, but also like online spaces and stuff. I think it's like a really interesting discussion to have.
Definitely.
Before we get into that though, I'm just going to jump up for just a second.
Okay, cool. Well, they have this section here that's kind of outlining kind of political goals. So just to kind of, I guess, to wrap that part up a little bit, like they have a bullet point list. They're like that because it is basically a manifesto. And this gets down to like they're like these are things we should be demanding: stop the construction of new prisons and have prisons under new names, which like is very good because they've like spent a lot of the book explaining how like other things are basically prisons, but they're just pretending they're not. Divest from and target international corporations profiting from securitization and settler colonialism. Demand that our institutions divest from these violently parasitic corporations. End the police's use of lethal weapons and other cruel tools such as firearms, tasers, and spit hoods. I don't know what a spit hood is actually. Mule, do you know that?
I've got no idea, but I'm going to Google it right now.
Redirect funds from police equipment, vehicles, and weapons into community empowering resources. Abolish stop and search, one of the key tactics used to harass and criminalize young people of color. Organizations such as Why Stop provide tools and apps to help log stop and search incidents. Abolish, prevent, and the gangs matrix. Resist conspiring with these kinds of racist frameworks in whatever spaces they show up. So I recently listened to a really interesting episode of the podcast It Could Happen Here, where they were talking, actually it was guest hosts from a different podcast, but it doesn't matter. They were talking about this like sweep of like policies that they were referring to as like the ugly laws that happened a while ago, like in the early 20th century, to be clear, that were all a set of policies to just try and remove people they thought were undesirable from just public life and public sight. And
like TikTok did that.
Yeah, but like for physical, real, society.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they talked about that was like the crime matrix or the matrix law or something like that, which is quite funny, like, in our context, but like this was like 1920 or whatever. And actually like this what they talk about in the book, I was telling Nat about this, like the gangs matrix is in many ways a follow-on from that, because it's all about establishing a matrix, a framework of legibility for like analyzing and surveilling people who they think are going to do crimes. Anyway.
So a spit hood
Yes.
is a incredibly depressing piece of clothing that the police force over people's heads.
Jesus Christ.
If they think that they are at risk of being spat at or being bitten.
Oh, fuck, that's horrible.
And the pictures are just pretty grim. It's just basically like a cage that they put over your face made of like latex or whatever. You know, they might not even like wash it after they've been.
That's fucking horrible. That's disgusting.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. It kind of looks like something. Chat, if you've ever seen Dune or any of the adaptations of Dune, it kind of looks like something that Harkonnens would be into.
To carry on with the list of demands, decriminalize sex work. These are all the very, to be clear, like very immediate demands, but I'll talk about that in a second. Decriminalize sex work. Repeal laws that criminalize survival, e.g. drug laws and vagrancy laws, and release everyone in prison for those offenses. Establish confidentiality between services and the people they support. Abolish mandatory reporting. Resist new bills to expand policing and probation powers. The Kill the Bill coalition of feminist groups and groups fighting against police brutality, for protest rights, for migrants' rights against the criminalization of GRT communities, and against child imprisonment have all joined together in resistance to the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, bringing hundreds of thousands out onto the streets on 1st of May 2021. Unfortunately, that bill has passed. Some of the worst parts of it were taken out, but like the probably worst bits, like literally worst, like the, just policies that are just genocidal against the GRP community were still in. Establish community defense against state intervention. That one's a big one and very fucking cool. Spread information about your rights and resources to support people experiencing criminalization in your local area. Local police monitoring projects are already set up in London, Manchester, and other cities across the UK, and are an important tool for keeping track of police actions in our communities. Yeah, and I mean, like, that's fucking base as hell. And it's also like reinforcing that I do think that Cradle Community and Red Planet, in terms of the guests we have on, the ideas we discuss, like what we're about as a show, like we really see eye to eye quite closely. And I think that's backed up by the fact that like the book shouts out queer care and like cop watch, like and I think they know other people, like kind of are linked in with other people who we've had as guests or are talking to be guests as well.
We need some cop watch orgs on here. We got to get some cop watch.
We had a cop watch episode, but we should do it again. Yes, we did.
Oh my god, I was not there.
Did you miss it? Maybe
I must have missed it.
Yeah.
But I do think that like that brings me to a point about the wider structure of this, which is like how we build a world without prisons. It really reframed my understanding of transformative justice, because when I first heard about transformative justice, I kind of thought that like I kind of heard about it on a very individualistic kind of level, because like the way that the Barnard Center for Women's Research talks about it, they're talking about like examples of this person's harmed this person, and then this is what we would blah, blah, blah. And so I thought that the transformation was more about like changing the conditions that led to the harm. That was the transformation they were talking about. But really, it is talking about transforming the whole of society, because like, just like with the Republic, right? Like Socrates asks the question, what is justice? And then by the end of it, he's like, so we need like, we need this kind of structure of society, and the people who guard that society need to act this way, and art needs to be like this, and I'll censor these poems and blah, blah. And it's like, he's figured out like everything he wants about how society should be. He's kind of Stalinist about it, but like he has a pretty complete picture. And it's like that can happen when you ask like, what is justice? And I think that, it's really important to understand that the transformation in transformative justice is we need to build a world without prisons. And to do that is so many steps away from where we are now, because they'll just try and build prisons with other names. And they have so much invested in putting people in prison and having people in prison and in building prisons, that we need to change so much on such a deep level that like, I really like that their kind of manifesto points I just read out are kind of like very immediate, but the rest of the book tells you what the direction is. Like, they're like, we need to demand these things right fucking now. But like, if you've read this book, you understand what the long-term project is here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to, because I wasn't on that episode, but I did watch a bit of the Cradle Community episode, and I thought it was really, really awesome. Especially with Kelsey, I think it was sharing, the story of her assault, her sexual assault. And that really kind of resonated with me a bit, because I am a victim of child sexual abuse in two different unrelated, they're only related because they're child sexual abuse scenarios. And, my sort of journey in as a victim, right, has gone from, complete denial to extreme violent thought, obviously that I would never act on or whatever, but it's, the range of like what I think I would want to happen to the people who abused me has changed radically throughout the years. And I think some of that is really important. I think a lot of victims don't get listened to a lot. A lot of people like to talk big and say, listen to victims, but like sometimes what happens on the journey of being a victim is you realize that the thing that has been taken from you that you cannot get back, by taking something from someone else, still doesn't get it back, right? So if I wanted to put these women in prison for 1,000 years, never see the light of day again, that's it, game over, it wouldn't get me what was stolen from me, right? That it doesn't bring it back. And that's why these conversations about like what is justice, I think, are so important, because it's genuinely the eternal question. Like, what is justice? There are actually, like, I meant to research it for this episode, but I completely forgot. But there are actually small movements of people who have had people die in capital punishment, prisoners who have harmed their family, abused, murdered their family, or even themselves, and they've been put to the chair. And these victims have been campaigning for the end of capital punishment, because they've gone through this, horrific trauma, this horrific ordeal of, with their loved ones or themselves being tortured, hurt, whatever's happened to them, harmed. And then they reach the finality of it, which is that person who did this, their life is gone. They are no longer on the planet anymore. They can't hurt anyone anymore. It's over. And the trauma is still there. And they cannot be free from it. And this is the issue that people don't talk about when they consider what justice is, and what the reality of transformative justice is. So I think it's so important to really frame it as that,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, like, Nat and I have been talking, and my friend Andy, like, they were reading some stuff that I think is in that's an anarchist perspective that's maybe in defense of, like, we could call it street justice. Like, Chelsea made the reference when she was talking about, like, her she knew a transformative justice activist whose TV got stolen, and he was like, no, it's chill. And she was like, no, but I still she was like, I kind of still believe in street justice. Like,
I remember
this guy is out there with the TV. And like,
we could just get it back.
Yeah, like, I think that, like, I think there are wider conversations that you can explore that talk about both the moral legitimacy and the societal function of the possibility for, like, a survivor of some kind of trauma, a victim of some kind of abuse, to want to just get to just beat the shit out of someone or something like that. But it's like, I think that in terms of a holistic framework for society and how society needs to be, like, this book is incredible. And, like, that, what I'm alluding to without explaining and kind of being very simplistic about right now, like, that still is dealing with things very, like, on an individual level still. And, like, that's not the same as, Mule, what you're just saying about, like, capital punishment. Like, that's the state executing someone. And, like, even if we believed wholeheartedly that there's, like, a catharsis that someone could get if they, like, killed someone who killed someone they love or something like that, like, it's not that when the state puts someone in prison and then gives them the lethal injection or whatever is fundamentally not the same thing.
Even the concept is completely
which, just to again reiterate, like, I'm not advocating for the death sentence in any form here. I'm just saying that there are other perspectives that I think have interesting points.
Absolutely.
It's it is interesting because it is that thing where it's like a lot of the kind of, I would say, like, even like the revenge mindset, even in Well, like I think it just comes from a society that is deeply punitive, going all the way back. Like we are raised from a very young age to be like, this is how you solve a problem when someone does this to you. Like we, this harm needs to be addressed in this way, and they talk a lot in the book about how the they refer to the UK, but I think it applies in most, pretty much most places in the imperial core and even further abroad, where it's like they talk about outsourcing these interactions. So something happens and some harm has been done, and it's outsourcing the solving of this kind of conflict to cops, to social workers, to all this kind of stuff. Whereas like the ideal, well, like, from the brick by brick perspective, is that the ideal society kind of would arm people with the tools to solve these things as a community themselves, like so you don't need to go to the state, you don't need to go to the the cops or anything like that, because you're like, okay, well, this person is stolen from me, so we have the ability to address that as a community group, which
Nat's just linked me the thing I was referencing on Discord here, and it's called 31 Theses, a Manifesto. So again, we're dealing with another manifesto with a slightly different, but I think in many ways the same kind of perspective. And like the 31 Theses start with like Thesis 1, every rapist is a cop without a badge. Thesis 2, every cop is a rapist with a badge. And like kind of walks through these points, very logically, and just like showing how it's maybe something we could discuss another time in much more depth. But like the kind of one of the things that it crucially says is like, we do not and never have advocated for the introduction of standard procedure, rule, or policy of executing every rapist, and we're tired of this disingenuous straw man. Like they're basically just saying like, if there's a question of your individual kind of sense of catharsis or justice or whatever, that is just that's a different question to do, like, than how does society function. And I think that really ties into like Everybody Drink, like what David Graeber talks about in Debt, the First 5,000 Years, where like the
someone just mentioned that, Bordrella just mentioned that in chat.
Basically like if we're asking the question, what is justice? One thing we'll immediately bump into is that people in the society we live in seem to think that justice has a lot to do with debt. Like they think that when something's happened, something has to balance it out, and that would be justice, which is fundamentally like our symbol of justice is the scales, right? Which is literally a tool of trade. Like it's literally for weighing out and like bartering or whatever. Like it's like the idea that we need to balance things and correct a debt with justice is I'm not going to say it's a flawed idea. I'm going to say it's an idea we are allowed to actually question, because that's the more like the radical step that people are missing, that we can't even question that idea. And I think that that's what these do, right? Like every other framework for justice has still asked like, how do we balance things to make it right? Punitive justice is like an eye for an eye, because it's like literally an exchange. And then like rehabilitative justice is like, well, it's still the punishment, but then on top of that, hopefully we will give this person opportunities. And in many ways, like what was it, like I've forgotten the name of the other one. Anyway, like transformative justice, again, like by being about like society at large and the transformation of society at large into a world that could actually exist without prisons, like is demanding a reframing of justice that has nothing to do with debt. Like I'm really regretful that like I first kind of heard about transformative justice through this framing that was about like, if someone's harmed you, then what do you want to blah blah blah? Because again, like I just think it's so individualistic, and actually like the answer that they are getting at, that I think transformative justice more broadly gets at, that we all need to get, is like, if we're going to have justice, like it basically means to view every time injustice occurs as an opportunity to move society towards a better one. Like every time there's like, oh, something's happened, we need to correct something. What we need to correct is everything.
Like it's like looking at like, I guess like instances of harm as like a kind of more like a community failing as opposed to like the individualist thing. It's like, you know, like what are we not doing, like, or what are we doing, or what are we not doing that has allowed something like this to happen?
Yeah.
When I do disputes with members of the tenants union, one of the main things that they want and that we help them get, because of course we don't you know, put landlords in prison, even though that may be the best place for them for now. They
Mal-pilled mule.
What they
wait, mules.
No, we take them straight to the. No, that's too dark,
straight to the gulag. Actually, what people mostly want is they want compensation, and you got me thinking about that just then, Sophie, right? Because it's like, so if you've had, and mostly the compensation is for things like assault, not assault, more like abuse, more like what's the word? Harassment. Harassment is the word I'm looking for. So they will be like, yeah, you know, and oftentimes people will be a little bit hesitant to ask for compensation, but that's only because they feel like they can't do that. They feel like they can't do that, but when they're enabled to, when we empower them to, they go, oh, well, I suppose about $8,000 would probably do it. Do you know what I mean? And they think in their head, like, actually, yeah, if I had $8,000, I could probably go on holiday and forget about it. And it makes me think, right? When you said that just then, it's like, yeah, that is the main thing that people want. People want monetary relief. They want, like, you know, something has to be given. And I imagine in like the ancient times, it would have been like, okay, well, give me a goat, give me 500 sheaves of wheat or whatever, yeah, and this kind of stuff. And it makes me think, because we think about life outside of capitalism. That's what we're trying to inspire everybody to do. And if we live a life outside of capitalism where everybody's needs are met to the point where people are allowed to thrive and travel and you know, move freely around the world without fear of discrimination, and everyone's fed, clothed, housed, has medical care, then how many of these grievances not only would just disappear, but would also become irrelevant in terms of, you know,
in terms of compensation.
You wouldn't need compensation because it's like, well, my life is great, actually. I don't need any of that stuff. So I think,
and that's where you get this other kind of thesis I'm referring to, where people, it's like, if you're asking in a situation like that, if you're asking in your society functions like that, how do you feel when someone's hurt you? You have a very different question. It's a very different question all of a sudden. And also, like, the reason it starts with like every rapist is a cop without a badge and every cop is a rapist with a badge is like, because they're talking about, you know, the system that sits on top of all of us has like borders with violent enforcement on them, right? And it's like the violence of that needs to be met with a pushback of power. Is a point they're getting. Anyway, yeah, exactly.
I think, one thing that I think I wanted to talk about, because I think we are getting kind of late in the stream, but the idea that a lot of people like to think that there might be, like, if something happens, that they can just find, like, you know, they can just jump online and they can be like, okay, transformative justice guidelines or something like that. But I think like one thing that's really important to know or to remember is that there is no structured process, and it's going to look different depending on the community, depending on the kind of harm or that kind of stuff. There are things like it's more like the core philosophy than like an actual guideline for what to go through. And so it's kind of like I mean,
they have a section called self-accountability, where they have a set of questions we can ask so that we're aware of our own like accountability. And they also say,
I think that's
they talk a little bit
in the notes that I just was that's what I was trying to segue into. No, you go. All right. You picked up on what I was putting down.
Cool. It's like we've read the same book. Like one tool I know that people dealing with transformative justice like to use is the pod map, right? So what people do you have in your life, and what ways can they support you, and what ways can you maintain your relationship, and like what are the limits and boundaries of their support for you, and so on, right? And what, like, not just people but also like institutions maybe, or like groups or communities or resources, and that's how you build a pod map out. But like they make a really good point towards the end of here that like in order to be accountable, one function needs to be that like for people who have done harm or might do harm, like having that person having, or that party having like a map of a pod map that's almost like it's not just that, it's definitely there to support them, but it's also there to make sure that they are accountable. Like, it's there to be like, you know, these people offer you this support in this way, but also they're gonna like make sure that you're, you know, not you know, whatever. Anyway, so they said, to end this section, we extend an invitation to reflect on the following questions on power, defensiveness, and taking responsibility. Where and how do you hold power in your life, e.g. as a parent or a teacher, through age, race, and gender? I'm obviously a hot girl, so like that's power I have over everyone.
Lots of power, yeah. Pretty privilege is like that's actually more important than class.
That's true. Yeah,
male. Like Mark's failed to realize this, but yeah.
Mark's failed to predict e-girls.
It's true.
How are you affirming those around you? By saying, Mule, your beard looks lovely today, my little peanut.
Oh, thanks, Sophie. You look beautiful, gorgeous, incandescent, phenomenal, out of this world.
Thank
You're from
you.
Mars.
How are you making clear to others that you are open to feedback? Think of a time when you caused harm and didn't apologize or repair the relationship as well as you wish you had. What were your fears around taking accountability? How does being challenged make you feel? How do you feel when someone's boundary is different from your own? What are your tools for protecting yourself? How will you make sure to carve out time and space to address harm and support people around you? What has stopped you from being able to rebuild trust with someone you have harmed in the past? How can you communicate to others in an honest and sensitive way about harm you have caused in the past? How will you speak about the harm with people close to you and with new friends, partners, colleagues, and comrades?
Yeah,
you know,
I think a lot of these are really good. And they also like, they totally apply to what we were talking about earlier about, you know, like in online spaces and stuff as well. Yeah. Like all this stuff is like pretty general. But yeah, one thing that I know that is that I've kind of like just through, you know, reading and kind of like taking part in various things over the years for transformative justice, I think one thing that often gets overlooked by a lot of people, like when you're thinking about like there's been harm in your community or whatever, a lot of people will jump directly to like, okay, we need to you know, like we need, like they focus on the person who was the person that caused the harm, and they're like, okay, you know, and like, and you see this a lot where people will jump in straight to attack that person or whatever. But in a lot of studies I've seen and a lot of kind of work around transformative justice, a lot of people, a lot of victims find that it's not so much like they don't get the best sense of kind of like, I guess, support or closure from seeing other people attack this other person, or these people try to do, but from recognizing the harm that has been done to them. So, you know, like I think it's important when something happens, instead of just going straight to like, oh yo, fuck that guy, like, you know, like, or whatever. Instead checking in with your friend, you know, or like actually just taking the time to be like, hey, look, you know, like I can see that something like that this has really harmed you, like this, you know, and just kind of like,
no, I mean, if we're speaking about like online spaces, like there have been times when people have been super transmisogynistic to me in various ways, and I have seen people who are, you know, supposedly fucking leftists, who are like doing streams about like the drama, and they like, we are like also supposedly friends, like we've chatted before or whatever, or chat fairly regularly, and like before even checking in with me, like they are live and streaming to talk about like this thing's happening with Sophie from Mars and these people, and it's like, fucking okay, that's cool, nice one. Good job, man.
Very normal.
So normal, I do think
it's
like
pretty gross.
I think that there's checking in, and I think there's also like there being a community understanding of what has happened. I think that's another thing that's really important to people's sense of justice. Like I think that, as hard as this is to imagine, like suppose some like white leftist was really racist. That never happens.
That never happens. That's really hard to try and picture in my head. Actually, nothing like that's happened recently at all.
Or like every 2 weeks since the dawn of the online left. But like I think that there being a popular understanding of like the way in which someone was racist is one of the things that like would help the people of color in the community to feel like welcome and safe in the community, is if like they saw that everyone was like very clear on what had happened, which feels like a really hard thing to kind of establish in an online space, because obviously like it's so esoteric and so full of like people just like, you know, playing telephone and just like twisting things constantly. But like I do think that if we had principles towards trying to like understand what has happened, you know, if we had these transformative justice principles and one of them had to do with like knowing clearly what's happened and understanding why it's wrong was a really important thing for like processing harm, I think that we could actually achieve that. Like it doesn't have to be like we're trying to completely destroy and remove the person who did the bad thing. It can be like we're all agreed on why the bad thing was bad. Like if that same person like keeps doing it and is showing everyone that like they're just doing it because they're a fucking grifter and they just want more clout and money, or like they're just doing it because they are just like deep down racist and they have this ingrained beliefs or whatever, you know, that's a different conversation about like, you know, that person being excluded because they've got this clear track record. But like, and that's to do with like community safety and what you want your community to be about. But like, I think that like people processing that harm has happened by being like, well, this is what happened, is kind of a huge first step, right? Like if the community were easily able to be like, this white leftist was racist in this way, this harms the community of color because of this, like this is a whatever, like, and we just were like, cool, we understand what's happened there. You know, I think I'm trying to say that shared understanding is probably like the fundamental thing, as hard as it is to get that on the internet. And like, but if you had that shared understanding of what had happened, you could also have a shared understanding of like, what does that person need to do to then be acceptable? Like, you know, because like, you know, an apology is just a fucking gesture, but like it can be enough sometimes. If you've all got a shared understanding of what's happened, and someone's like, "Yo, I'm really sorry, that was fucked up," and you know, I don't make excuses for it, but I do understand what happened. Like that for a lot of people would be enough. Were you the same, Neil?
I've already forgotten. Doesn't matter.
I just think both sides of it, like supporting people who've been harmed and like what a person needs to do to show that they're not going to be harmful again, both come out of a shared understanding. So I'm kind of like, if we wanted that for the online left, like understanding why a shared understanding is important would probably be like the absolute fundamental. And then from there, you're like, how does this person need to change? How can we make sure these people are okay and feel welcome?
I've just remembered it, and also
fantastic,
and also how to prevent it. Like that was the biggest one. It was like, okay, so you know, what's the root cause of this as well? Like because these are really the things that need to be attacked, right? Again, it's like Michael Brooks, be ruthless with systems. You know, just absolutely ruthless.
Be kind to people and ruthless to. I have it tattooed on my body.
Yeah, do you actually? That's incredible.
Yeah, I did it myself. I'm wearing pretty loose jeans right now. I might be able to show it.
Get it
out. It's like the whale from Night in the Woods. And like around the whale, it says "Be kind to people and ruthless to systems."
So dope. I fucking love that shit.
But yeah, like another reason I think that like a shared understanding is so important is like there's an instance that like I've had pretty recently where like I've been harmed and then people who I'm in a community with like do not understand the way in which I've been harmed and have treated me really badly because of that. Like they've actively been hostile because they see like an association to someone who's harmful and don't understand that the association is that harmful person was harming me. And like, again, like a shared understanding, because it's like, I've got my closer friends around me and they all fucking know what's going on. And then it's like clear as day for them. And then there's these people who are kind of a couple of steps further away from me. And it's like, you know,
So we are getting towards the end of our little early finish stream now. So do we have any homework for this week? I think maybe just like to reflect on some of these questions.
I'd say get the book if you can.
Yeah, get the book if you can afford to grab it. But if you can't, just when the VOD comes up, you can rewind and just maybe think about those questions that we asked, which are directly from
about
the book.
Self-accountability, definitely.
Yeah. Well, because I think there's definitely parts in there that I was just like,
Can I quickly run through?
On pasta.
I think these things are super relevant to like the question of homework. So I'll just say like, they have questions to explore, and then a couple of other things. I'll try and be quick, but like questions to explore. How do you support your friends to reflect on their actions when they've hurt someone or have done something out of alignment with their values? Who facilitates the conflict work in your communities? Think of a time you felt like you needed to call the police. Can you identify what you needed in that moment? How else could you have been supported by those around you to get what you needed? How are people being targeted by the state in your community? How might your community be targeted if you begin engaging in transformative justice and community accountability? And then like the section right after that, I'll mostly just read the titles of these, but they basically say like, these are things we need. The section's called Joy and Healing, right? They're like, so much of British culture is built around suffering and then wanting others to suffer like we did. We say enough. Our liberation demands joy. So like they've got these sections that are like healing justice, collective grieving, building sustainable and nourishing political movements, joy and resistance, imagination, rest and creativity. So it's like, you know, they're again, like, please read the book. But like it's they have some pretty good like building blocks for like where we need to start off. And I think that in terms of homework, maybe I'll post those pages somewhere, like maybe the Red Planet Twitter, so people can see them. But if you, I think if you want next steps, the book has them. Yeah.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right. Well, with that then, why don't we talk a little bit about our Patreon?
I think we should do that, Tim. Thank you so much for the wonderful idea. What about our Patreon? The color, the banner image, the logo, Sophie stalling so she can bring up the tier list so that she can read the Sprite mode, which is £2 a month, and get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. Benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you are helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, access to the Red Planet Discord. What's our other tiers?
Well, after that, we
go on.
No, go, Mule.
No, okay, it's Goblin mode. Everyone loves a Goblin. £9.50 a month. We all get a little Goblin mode from time to time. Complete your Gobology by going Goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode, a set of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that. Access to exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts, which me and Tim are kind of discussing tentatively a little bit. We might be playing some games soon. I don't know if Sophie's going to join us or Kira, but we'll let you know if you're in the Discord. If you're doing
it, I'm going to try and be there.
There you go. Cool. Excellent fucking news. But Tim, tell us about the next one.
The next one is Beast Mode, which for me is New Zealand $38 a month. I'm not sure what. $20 a month.
Oh, $20 a month.
$20 I can see on the screen, my little stream screen there. So holy shit, are you actually going to go Beast Mode? Well, then we can offer you all of the stuff from the lower tiers and pin badges. Yep, pin badges. We excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It is completely cool and good to do. And of course that includes the Discord benefits as well. And the tangible goods from like the stickers from the previous tiers. But what about sicko mode, Soph?
Well, sicko mode is an interesting one because it's 100 freedom dollaroos, which is the universal term for the American currency. And if you support us that much, we can only reasonably offer you everything from the other tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream, like this one. Goblin Games NZ and JBP, thank you so much for becoming our sickos and supporting the stream. Your $100 a month each pays for like Conrad to work on a whole fucking show, because it's like that's
strings.
Think of how much delicious gruel he's getting because of your contributions. Thank you, sickos. You're the best. Except for all the other patrons who are equally as good, except financially.
True.
That was a smooth thank you. And if you want a smooth thank you like that, consider becoming a patron.
That's right. It's Sophie Day.
We have goals. We're trying to get to 900 quid. We're currently about 600 quid with a couple more sickos or a bunch more sprites or not that many more goblins or certainly not that many more beasts. We could absolutely hit that goal. And if we do that, we're going to get an editor, which means we're going to have loads of little clips. We're also going to be able to produce a little bit of documentary content, which we're really fucking excited about. And I'm really excited about forcing Mule to play a tabletop role-playing game with us because he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
I
But
don't
you
want
will.
to do it. I
That'll
will.
be like the celebratory stream. Well, yeah, we'll do that. And there was something else
Also-
as well that I feel like I signed him up for, but I can't remember what that was.
Is the hacker photo shoot?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and
Maybe yeah.
I do
Okay,
also
no.
want to say because I think we don't do this often enough. But if you've been watching on YouTube chat, we're sorry that we don't look at the YouTube chat as often as we should.
Oh,
If you are
I did
watching our
have that
VOD on
one.
YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us out.
Yeah.
But I've got some other people that you should like, comment, and subscribe, and really help out. And her name is Sophie from Mars.
Wow.
Where can we found you?
Oh wow, you fucking I was on a different tab. You said people you can support, and she's called what? Fucking all right.
Yeah, you're like more than one person, no?
You can find me on YouTube at Sophie from Mars, Twitter and Twitch and Tumblr and octodon.social/@Sophie from Mars, where I do a lot of trauma posting. And you can but the most important one is patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. That's how I pay my bills. So please check it out. I'm writing about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos right now. It's gonna be a wild ride. A lot of kooky stuff happened with that there lady. But what about a kooky guy I know called Tim? Where can we find him?
You can find me here on Twitch and over on YouTube at Conquest of Dread. I haven't been streaming too much lately because of the flood, but before that, I was streaming Black Book, and I'm going to carry on doing that because it's a really good game. And yeah, but then over on Twitter, you can find me at Dread Conquest, which is where all the shit posting happens. What about DJ Mule? Where can Donald Mule be found?
Good God, Tim, thank you so much. You can get me at DJ Mule on pretty much everything, apart from Twitter, where it's DJ Mule with an underscore at the end. I do, what is it? What do I actually do? I do Twitch. I stream from Monday to Thursday, about 5 to 6 p.m. UK time till late. Just doing politics, video games, all that nonsense. I am also a YouTuber. I'm working on a video at the moment. It's still in progress. Getting back to work on it this week. It's about Berserk, the manga Berserk, and how it is a queer polyamorous love story. It's going to be a really, really good video. I'm really happy with how it is turning out at the moment. Yeah, support me on Patreon. I'm doing it all, you know, all the updates, they're on there. You can find out actually what's going on there. And yeah, I think that's it. And let's not forget wonderful sweet Kara Chats, who's in the chat, and she is available on Kara Chats on Twitch. She's also on Twitter at Kara
Go
Chats.
to her Twitch and then go in the chat and then get the link tree, which is linktree.e/Kara Chats, and then click on the links, which Twitch doesn't want you to know about.
That's the one.
Secret links.
That's the one. Yeah.
In the meantime, thank you for watching. Next week,
Also, we
What?
need to give a big shout out to our sickos.
I literally did that.
We did.
Oh,
we
did
did.
you? Oh, okay.
It's
I
Tim
must have
Day.
missed
Tim
it.
Day.
That's Tim Day.
But
Well,
thank you
okay.
for watching. And next
Fuck
week
them
we
sickos. Yeah.
we thank you for the
Sorry,
support of our
sickos, we love
Patreon.
you.
And we'll see you next week when we're talking to, we don't know yet. It's a surprise even to us. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.